The day finally came. After months of dust, paint fumes, and endless trips to Home Depot, the house was ready. Fresh paint lingered in the air, the wood floors shined in the late afternoon light, and the white curtains Jen had picked swayed gently with the breeze. This should have been a milestone, a moment to celebrate the beginning of a family, the promise of stability. But as I stood in the doorway with the keys in my hand, the weight in my chest told me otherwise. The house was beautiful, yes. But what good is a house if the people inside it can't trust each other? That anonymous text still haunted me. I hadn't mentioned it again, not wanting Jen to feel accused, but the words played on repeat in my head like a broken record. My trust felt like a bridge patched together with duct tape still standing. But one small crack and it could collapse completely. That afternoon, my parents came by. They brought flowers, a store-bought cake, and the kind of enthusiasm that parents have when they see their kid's first real home. Jen was gracious, smiling, busy pouring drinks, trying to host. For a moment, it almost felt normal, almost like we were already the family we pretended to be. But then my mum pulled me aside in the kitchen and whispered the question I'd been dreading. "She looks better," she said, "more put together. But her eyes, they still carry something heavy. Are you sure this is what you want, son?" I forced a smile and whispered back, "I'm not sure, but I want to believe." By evening, the house was quiet again. No family, no noise, just me and Jen sitting on the bare living room floor. We shared a half-eaten pizza, soda cans scattered on the floor, and the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. No furniture yet, no TV, just the two of us and the kind of silence that presses down until it's unbearable. Jen broke it first. "You're still thinking about that message, aren't you?" I froze. "How do you know?" She gave me a tired, almost bitter smile. "Because I can feel it. You look at me like you're searching for something wrong, like you're waiting for me to slip. You don't have to say it out loud, I know." I sat there, letting her words hang in the air before finally admitting the truth. "I'm scared, Jen. I'm scared everything I've worked for, this house, this family, Usit, could all crumble if I put my trust in the wrong place." Her eyes met mine. They were red, worn, tired. But this time there were no tears, just determination. "You're allowed to be scared," she said. "But if you let fear run the show, we lose. Whether or not anyone cheats, whether or not anyone leaves, fear will eat us alive." She reached for my hand, placed it on her stomach where our baby was quietly growing, and whispered, "You can keep doubting me, or you can choose to believe me. But you can't do both. Our child needs a father who stands firm, not a man who keeps looking over his shoulder." Her words hit me hard, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. It wasn't just about whether Jen was trustworthy, it was about whether I had the guts to trust her. I sat there in silence, staring at my hand on her belly, feeling both terrified and strangely calm. Then I took a deep breath and finally said it. "I'll trust you. Not because everything's perfect, not because we'll never fight again, but because, if I don't, we've already lost." Jen's lips curved into a faint smile. Her shoulders softened, and she leaned into me, whispering, "Then let's start over. Right here. In this house." That night, we didn't even have a bed set up, so we dragged a mattress onto the floor. Jen curled up next to me, her hand resting on her stomach, while I stared at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle. It wasn't the picture-perfect dream I had. Imagine no shiny furniture, no staged nursery, no Instagram moment. but there was something raw and real about it. For once, it felt like we weren't pretending for anyone. We were just existing, broken but trying. At one point in the dark, Jen whispered, "Do you ever think about leaving? For good?" The question froze me. I swallowed hard before answering. I thought about it. More than once. But every time I picture it, I see our kid growing up without both of us under the same roof. And that hurts more than anything else. She didn't reply right away. Then she whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I don't want you to stay out of guilt. I want you to stay because you believe in me, in us." The weeks that followed weren't magical. Amanda's shadow was still there. Doubt didn't vanish overnight. Some days Jen was warm and hopeful. Other days she was distant and afraid. Counseling sessions helped, but they also ripped open wounds we'd both been ignoring for years. Still, little by little, the house started to feel like a home. Jen brought over baby clothes, picture frames, small things that filled the space with life. She would hum to herself while folding tiny onesies, and in those moments, I could see the woman I fell in love with. One evening, while painting the nursery, Jen stopped mid-stroke, turned to me, and said, "I want this room to be full of love. No yelling, no suspicion, no ghosts. Just us and our baby." I nodded, my throat tightening. "Then that's what we'll give them." I'd be lying if I said the fear disappeared. It didn't. Some nights I still lay awake, waiting for another text, waiting for Amanda to stir things up, waiting for old insecurities to creep back in. But something inside me shifted. I realized choosing trust isn't about certainty. It's about commitment. It's about saying, "I know the risks, but I'm choosing this anyway." Because if I let fear dictate everything, I wouldn't just lose Jen. I'd lose the chance to be the kind of father I want to be. So as the night fell over our new home, I made my choice. Not to erase the past, not to pretend the scars didn't exist, but to move forward anyway. The house wasn't just drywall and paint anymore. It wasn't just a dream I bought with a mortgage. It was fragile, imperfect, but alive. It was the place where we could fall apart and rebuild, where our love could either shatter or grow stronger. And as I lay there with Jen breathing softly beside me, our child growing between us, I knew that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't standing on the side of fear anymore. I was standing on the side of love. You know what's funny about marriage? People tell you 20 years is a lifetime, but when you're the one living it, it slips by in the blink of an eye. That's how it was for us. My wife and I built what looked on the surface like a stable, happy life. We had the suburban home, 2 kids growing up healthy, family dinners at the table, vacations that weren't extravagant but full of laughter. We split bills, juggled schedules, and shared the load like any decent couple would. If you had asked me back then, "Are you happy?" I would have said yes, absolutely. But happiness has layers, and buried deep under all those layers, there were small cracks forming hairline fractures I didn't notice. The kind of cracks that don't break the glass right away, but spread slowly, silently, until one day you realize the whole thing is fragile from the beginning. I kept in touch with a few female friends, not exes, not flames, not anyone I'd ever hooked up with, just friends. 1 from college, 2 from old jobs. They weren't a daily part of my life, not even weekly. A text on a birthday, a quick "how are you?" On social media, nothing more. I never hid it. Sometimes I'd mention it casually to my wife. Hey, my old classmate messaged me, said her daughter just got into college, or one of my former co-workers landed a new job in Chicago, and every single time I noticed something in her face. A pause, a tight smile, sometimes nothing at all, but the silence spoke louder than words. One day I asked, "Does it bother you when I talk to my female friends?" She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Do you ever hear me talking to male friends?" I laughed it off. "Well, you don't have any, but if you wanted to, I wouldn't mind." Her eyes flickered, and she turned away without a word. I brushed it off, like I always did. Years went by. The pattern stayed the same. Me occasionally mentioning a friend, her growing a little stiffer each time. I didn't think much of it until one morning not long ago. We were sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee, sunlight streaming through the blinds. Out of nowhere, she said, "Must be nice having female friends to talk to." I set my mug down. "What do you mean?" She gave me this half smile, sharp around the edges. "I don't have male friends. None. I don't have anyone to text, to share a joke with, to check in on. But you do. That must feel nice." It hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. For the first time in 20 years, I realized she felt the scales weren't balanced. So I asked gently, "Do you want male friends? Just regular ones, not romantic, not complicated, just friends?" She shook her head. "No, because when we got engaged, you told me I wasn't allowed to." My stomach dropped. "Wait, what?" "That's not what I said. I only meant no exes, no hookups, no leftover baggage. I never said you couldn't have male friends." She stared at me, her eyes steady, almost unreadable. Then she said quietly, "Well, that's not how I heard it. And for 20 years, I believed you didn't want me to. So I didn't." I swear, my heart sank right there at the kitchen table. 2 decades. 2 decades of her living with a rule I never meant to make. 2 decades of her quietly denying herself the simple freedom of friendship because she thought it was what I demanded. And suddenly, all those little moments flashed back in my mind. The way she'd cut off those men from her past so abruptly. The way she'd fallen silent every time I mentioned a female friend. The bitterness hidden behind her polite smile. It all made sense, and for the first time, I wondered, was our marriage really built on trust and love, or had it been built on sacrifice? Hers, not mine. Ever since that morning when my wife admitted she'd spent 20 years believing she wasn't allowed to have male friends, I haven't been able to rest easy. I thought I had been clear from the beginning. No contact with exes. No keeping in touch with people you've slept with. To me, that was a boundary worth protecting in marriage. But to her, those words meant something else. They became a blanket ban, a wall she built between herself and any man outside of our marriage. And that wall stood there for 2 decades. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The soft yellow light from the lamp threw long shadows across the hardwood floor. The clock ticked louder than usual. I remembered the night I proposed, remembered the way she looked me in the eye and promised, "I will." Back then, I felt safe. Back then, I thought we were both on the same page. But maybe what I really did was take something from hers, something I didn't even realize she valued. The more I thought about it, the heavier it felt. If I'd explained better, would she have lived differently? Would she have felt freer, lighter? Or would it all still have piled up, silently, until one day it broke open like it did yesterday morning? The next day I tried to bring it up. "Listen," I said gently, "about what you said yesterday. I never meant you couldn't have male friends. I just meant exes, people you'd been intimate with. I don't want you to think I ever wanted to take that away from you." She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on her phone. A few seconds passed before she answered. "Well, that's nice to hear. But it's been 20 years, hasn't it? I'm not 25 anymore. I can't just go out and make new friends like that." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't sharp. It was flat, almost resigned. And that, somehow, hurt more than if she had yelled. She was right. At 50, you don't just go make friends the way you do in your 20s. Most of your circle is co-workers, neighbors, or other parents. Whatever freedom I was suddenly giving her now, it was too late to really matter. After that, something changed between us. On the surface, everything looked normal. We ate dinner together, talked about the kids, managed bills, discussed the week. But underneath, there was a silence neither of us knew how to break. Sometimes, I'd catch her sitting out on the porch, staring into the night like she was waiting for an answer to a question she couldn't even put into words. I'd want to sit down to ask her what she was thinking, but I'd stop myself, because deep down, I already knew some spaces can't be filled with quick words or reassurances. And then the questions started spinning in my own head. Was I selfish to put that rule in place so long ago? Why was it okay for me to keep female friends, but not okay for her to even have male ones? Did she ever feel trapped? Did she ever resent me for it? Did she ever regret marrying me under those terms? Those questions didn't leave me alone. I carried them around like heavy stones in my chest. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I finally asked what had been haunting me. "Can I ask you something?" I said quietly. "All these years, did you ever feel it was unfair? That I kept my female friends, but you cut yourself off from men who were just friends to you?" She looked at me, steady and calm. There wasn't anger in her eyes, just something that felt like acceptance. "Unfair," she repeated, almost with a sad little smile. "Yeah, of course. But I thought, I gave my word. You seemed to need it, so I lived with it. If it gave you peace, I figured that was enough." Her words hit me harder than if she had shouted at me. I thought I had gained safety. I thought I had secured loyalty. But what I'd really gotten was sacrifice. It had been quiet, steady, and invisible for 20 years. That night, I barely slept. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing beside me. And it hit me. In marriage, most of the wounds aren't caused by betrayal or cruelty. They're caused by the things we don't clarify, by the misunderstandings we don't realize until years later. Sometimes we don't even mean to hurt the person we love most, but one vague sentence, one misinterpretation, can become a chain that binds them for decades. And now, I can't escape the question that keeps circling back to me. If I want to make this right, is it already too late? In the days that followed, our house felt heavy in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. No shouting, no slammed doors, just this silence that lingered too long, like a fog you can't shake off. She went about her routine's work, cooking, talking with the kids, but every glance, every sigh, carried a weight that made my chest tighten. One night, while clearing the table after dinner, she said it, but with enough sharpness to make me freeze mid-step. "So tell me, do you really think it's fair? You get to have your female friends, and I don't have anyone." I turned, still holding a plate in my hands. Her face wasn't angry, not in the explosive sense, but her eyes were heavy with years of unspoken resentment. "I've told you," I started. "My female friends are old colleagues, friends from college. Nothing more." "I've never, I know," she cut me off. Her tone was steady, almost too steady. "But that doesn't make me feel any better. You've always had that freedom." I believed I wasn't allowed it. For 20 years. "Does that feel fair to you?" And there it was, the truth laid bare. I had no defense, no neat explanation, because she was right. After that, she spoke less to me. Not the icy, dramatic kind of silence, but a quiet retreat, the kind that builds a wall without ever saying the words. She still laughed with the kids. She still carried the rhythm of our home. But with me, it was like there was a thin sheet of glass between us. I could see her, hear her, even sit right next to her, yet she felt miles away. I started replaying everything in my head. That night I proposed, the way she cut ties with men who had once been part of her world. How relieved I felt at the time, how safe. And now, with distance, I could see it. What looked like security to me had been a quiet sacrifice for her. And sacrifices, when left unspoken, have a way of turning into something darker. Not a wildfire of rage that destroys overnight, but a slow burn, a steady, smoldering anger that doesn't tear down walls, but slowly erodes the foundation beneath them. One evening, I was sitting in the living room with a book when she came downstairs. She sat across from me, her expression unreadable. And then, without preamble, she asked, "Do you ever stop to think about how much I gave up because of that promise you made me keep?" The book slipped from my hands onto my lap. I swallowed hard. For 20 years, I thought I had been protecting us. But looking at her now, I realized I'd also been asking her to carry a weight I didn't even see. My voice cracked. I just wanted to protect our marriage, to keep the past from creeping in. But if it's left you feeling like you lost something, if I took something from you, I'm sorry. She didn't flare up. She didn't even look angry. Instead, she looked at me with a sadness so deep it hollowed me out. "I'm not blaming you," she said softly. "I chose to honor that promise. I thought it mattered to you. But after 20 years, seeing you still keep up with women friends, I realized how alone I'd been, how much I've been missing." Her words cut through me like glass. All this time, those casual texts, those occasional messages, I brushed off as meaningless. Those were the mirror reflecting her isolation back at her, that night. After she went upstairs, I sat in the dark long after the house went quiet. For the first time, I didn't feel like the man holding our marriage steady. I felt like the one who had unknowingly carved a hollow space right in the middle of it. And the scariest part, it wasn't her anger that shook me, it was her silence. Because silence doesn't explode. Silence just grows. And if I didn't find a way to reach her, I knew one day that silence could swallow us whole. And I couldn't help asking myself, if I don't fix this now, will there even be anything left to fix? After that night, I knew one thing for certain. If I stayed silent, if I kept pretending everything was fine, the distance between my wife and me would only grow. 20 years of marriage had taught me a lot, but nothing had prepared me for this moment, realizing that the woman I loved had been carrying loneliness in her heart for decades, and I hadn't even noticed it took me days to gather the courage. Funny thing is, I wasn't scared when I got down on one knee all those years ago, or when I promised her I'd be there through thick and thin. But telling the truth now, admitting that I might have been wrong all along, that terrified me, because the truth can be brutal, and once it's out, there's no taking it back. One evening, after dinner, when the kids had gone upstairs to do homework, I decided I couldn't put it off any longer. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table. Just a few minutes before, it had been full of laughter and clattering dishes. Now it felt heavy, quiet, like the air itself was waiting for me to speak. "I need to be honest with you," I began. My voice sounded rough, even to my own ears. She looked up at me. There wasn't anger in her eyes, at least not the sharp kind, but there was something that hurt even more: exhaustion, a kind of weary caution, like she didn't believe I had anything new to say. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days," I said, "and I realized that for 20 years I've been selfish, and I didn't even know it." She didn't answer. Her hands were folded tightly together on the table, knuckles pale. When I laid down that rule about cutting off contact with exes, I thought I was protecting us. But the truth is, I was scared. I was scared of losing you, scared that the past would somehow creep back in. And in my fear, I put a burden on you that I never carried myself. For a second, I saw her eyes flicker, a shimmer of emotion. She tried to blink away. I didn't realize. I went on, my throat tightening, though while I still texted old friends, women I never dated. But friends, nonetheless, you were living in silence. You kept a promise for me, while I lived without even noticing the cost to you. You've carried that loneliness for years, and I never once stopped to ask how you felt. This time, she sighed. Not dramatic, not angry, just tired. Her eyes were wet, but she kept her voice steady. "You know," she said softly, "there were so many times I wanted to bring it up, to ask you why it was okay for you, but not for me. But I told myself, you agreed to this. You promised him, and if keeping that promise gave you peace, then Fanai would live with it. But the longer I stayed quiet, the more I felt like I was losing pieces of myself." Her words hit me like a blow. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. I was afraid she'd pull away. "I was wrong," I said, my voice almost breaking. "You never should have had to sacrifice like that. You deserve friendships. You deserve connections, with men or women, it doesn't matter. I had no right to take that from you just because I was insecure." She looked up then. Her eyes weren't cold anymore, but they carried a kind of cautious hope. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. "I do," I said, nodding. "And I want to change. Not just because I know I was wrong, but because I don't want you to live even one more day feeling alone in this marriage." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she gave the smallest nod. But what she said next nearly brought me to my knees. "And what about me? Do you ever think about what I'm afraid of?" I wasn't just scared of losing friends. I was scared of losing myself. For 20 years, I've wondered if I've been living as your wife, or just a shadow of what you wanted me to be. I froze. That question cut straight through me. It wasn't just painful, it was shameful. I had never asked her if she was truly happy. I had only thought about my own fears, my own insecurities. That night, we talked longer than we had in years. She told me stories I'd never heard. About the co-worker who always checked in on her, and how she forced herself to be cold so she wouldn't break my rule. About seeing old classmates plan reunions online and quietly closing the page, because she knew some of her male friends would be there. Sometimes, she admitted with a sad little laugh, I just wanted to text someone, anyone, about a bad day. To complain, to laugh, to feel like more than just mum or wife. But every time I thought about it, I remembered what I promised you. And so I stayed quiet. Eventually, silence just became my normal. I sat there, listening, realizing with every word how much I'd taken from her without even realizing it. When she finished, I finally opened up in a way I never had before. I confessed my own fears, the insecurities I had carried all these years. How even after we got married, there was always a voice in the back of my head whispering, what if she goes back to someone from her past? What if you're not enough? And instead of trusting her, instead of trusting us, I turned those fears into rules, into control. I thought I was protecting our marriage, but really, I was building walls. As I spoke, I saw her expression soften. Maybe because for the first time in 2 decades, I wasn't pretending to have it all together. I was finally admitting that I was scared too. Later that night, when we lay in bed, she turned toward me. Her voice was almost a whisper. I'm not promising I'll forgive you overnight, she said. But tonight, I felt like you actually listened. And that's something I've been waiting for a very long time. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I held them in. In that moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. A marriage not built on fear or control, but on trust, honesty, and the kind of love that grows stronger when it finally learns to listen. After that night of confession, something in our home shifted. It wasn't like the movies, where honesty suddenly makes everything light and warm again. No, things felt heavier, quieter. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me, and I couldn't tell if it was anger, sadness, or something in between. But at least, for the first time in years, we weren't hiding behind silence anymore. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I had ignored for decades. The way she would stare at her phone, typing a few words and then deleting them, like she wanted to reach out to someone but couldn't. The way she laughed with her girlfriends on the phone, and then sighed the moment she hung up. I realized something that cut me to my core. The woman I'd shared my life with for 20 years had been quietly sacrificing parts of herself just to keep the peace. And now, after our conversation, it was like she stood at a crossroads, part of her wanting to rediscover who she was. Part of her afraid to take even one step too far. One night, while we were sitting on the couch watching TV, I asked her, out of the blue, if you could reconnect with any old friend, man or woman, who would it be? She froze, almost like she didn't believe I was serious. I don't know, she said carefully. Maybe someone from college, or a co-worker I used to be close with. But are you sure you'd be okay with that? After everything, I nodded. I don't want you to live in a box I built. All I want is for you to feel free but safe, trusted, and I know that trust has to go both ways. She didn't answer right away. She just kept her eyes on the TV, but I could see the corner of her mouth tremble like she was holding something back. A few days later, I walked into the living room and saw her smiling at her phone. It wasn't the kind of smile she gave the kids, or the polite chuckle she gave when scrolling funny videos. It was softer, almost nostalgic, I didn't ask. Partly because I was scared of the answer. Partly because I knew it was a moment she had a right to keep for herself. But my chest tightened anyway. I had promised I was ready to change, ready to let her breathe again. But seeing her like that reminded me that freedom always comes with risk. And the risk, in this case, was simple and terrifying. What if I wasn't the center of her world anymore? The cracks in our silence started to show more clearly. One night, lying in bed, I asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it?" Agreeing to that rule I made 20 years ago. She stared at the ceiling for what felt like forever. Then she whispered, "Yes, many times." But every time I thought about it, I reminded myself, I love you. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought keeping my promise was the right thing. But what I didn't realize was, while I was protecting your heart, I was slowly losing myself. Her words sliced through me. "I'm sorry," I said, barely holding my voice steady. "God, I'm so sorry." She turned to face me. Her eyes weren't cruel, but they were firm. "You can apologize, but what I need is change. Not just words." The next day, I tried something different. I handed her my phone and opened up an old text thread with one of my female friends. "This is someone I've stayed in touch with," I said. "There's nothing inappropriate, just friendship. I want you to read it if you want to. I don't want there to be any secrets." She looked surprised, then shook her head. "I don't need to read it," she said. "I don't want to be the police in your life. What I want is fairness. If you get to have friends, then I should too. That's all." Her words were simple, but they landed harder than any argument we'd ever had. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the bookshelf while memories of our 20 years washed over me. The late nights with crying babies, the long road trips to see family, the financial struggles we fought side by side. We had built a life together, brick by brick, hand in hand, and yet, in the middle of all that, I had quietly suffocated a part of her. I asked myself a question I didn't want to face. If one day she really did reconnect with an old friend, and that friend gave her joy or comfort that I hadn't, would I be strong enough to accept it? The question haunted me for days. It scared me, but it also pushed me to grow in ways I never thought I needed to. A week later, she sat down beside me while I was reading. Her voice was calm, steady. "I reached out to an old friend from college, just to say hi, nothing more. I wanted you to know." My heart pounded in my chest. I looked at her, forcing myself to stay calm. "Thank you," I said quietly. "It means a lot that you told me." She smiled, but it wasn't mischievous or secretive, it was relieved. "I don't want to start over with secrets. I've been silent long enough." I nodded, even though my stomach churned. Part of me wanted to hold her close for being honest. Another part of me felt jealousy rising toward a man I had never met. That night, lying beside her in the dark, I realized something that changed me. Marriage isn't a contract you sign once and lock away. It's not about rigid rules we set on day one. It's a journey, one where both people change, stumble, grow, and sometimes screw up. I turned toward her, took her hand in mine, and whispered, "I'll try. Not just say it, I'll actually try to trust you, to let you be yourself again." She didn't answer, but she squeezed my hand, and that simple squeeze felt like hope. Hope that maybe, even after the cracks, we could build something stronger. I remember that night so vividly. The house was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. After days of tension, arguments, and short tempers, we were both drained. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, while my wife shut herself in the bedroom. The home we'd built together for 20 years suddenly felt cold, like two strangers living under the same roof in that moment. I realized something important. This wasn't just about opposite-sex friendships. It ran much deeper. This was about trust, about old memories, about how differently we remembered the past and how poorly we'd been communicating 20 years ago. When we got engaged, I asked her not to keep in touch with hookups or friends with benefits. To me, it felt like common sense, a way to protect our relationship from unnecessary complications. She agreed. Back then, I thought we were on the same page. But somewhere along the way, her memory of that agreement morphed into something else. She believed I had asked her to cut off all male friendships. And so, she did. Meanwhile, I kept in touch with a few women I'd never dated, never hooked up with, just old friends from college or work. I rarely even spoke with them, maybe the occasional text or comment online. But when I mentioned them, my wife would get upset, and now I understood why. In her mind, she had sacrificed more than I had. She had given up friendships she might have enjoyed, while I had kept mine. To her, it wasn't about jealousy, it was about fairness. That night, I walked into our bedroom. She was lying on her side, back turned to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, unsure where to start. "I'm sorry," I finally said, my voice quiet. "I'm sorry if I've made you feel like you were missing out, or that I've been unfair." She didn't answer. Just a sigh, soft but heavy. I kept going. I never thought of those friendships as wrong. They weren't romantic, they weren't flirtatious. Just friends. But maybe I didn't realize how that looked to you, or how it made you feel. She turned then, her eyes wet and red. "The problem isn't them. The problem is, you told me I couldn't have guy friends. I gave that up. I walked away from it. And sometimes, yeah, I felt lonely. But you still get to keep your female friends. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Her words hit me like a punch. It wasn't about my friends. It was about the version of history she carried in her heart, the belief that she had been living under stricter rules than I was. We sat in silence for a long time. I reached for her hand. She pulled back at first, then let me hold it. "Maybe our memories are different," I said slowly. "Maybe I didn't explain myself well enough all those years ago. But if that's what you believed, then I need to fix it now. You can have male friends. You always could. As long as it's platonic, as long as it's clear. I never wanted you to feel like I was controlling you." Her tears spilled over. I could see the years of pent-up hurt, the silent sacrifices she had carried alone. "But it's too late now," she whispered. "I wouldn't even know where to start. I've trained myself to avoid friendships like that for so long." And she was right. It wasn't really about wanting new friends now. It was about recognition, about feeling seen, feeling like the compromises she made weren't one dash-sided dot. After that night, I tried to be more open. If I texted or chatted with a female friend, I told her. No secrets, no hiding. I even suggested that she come along for coffee sometime, so she could see for herself. But she wasn't interested. She just shook her head. "I don't want that." And that's when I finally got it. This was never about the friends. It was about the crack in our foundation, about her sense of fairness and trust. I thought a lot about how fragile marriage really is. It doesn't always break because of big betrayals or dramatic fights. Sometimes it's the small things, the misremembered promises, the unsaid words, the little wounds that never heal. One misunderstanding, left unchecked for decades, can turn into a thorn that keeps stabbing at both of you. That's when I started considering marriage counseling. We couldn't keep sweeping this under the rug. We needed a space where we could lay everything out, where she could feel heard, and where I could learn to see through her eyes. That night, as we sat together in the dark, she finally leaned her head against my shoulder. Her voice was soft, trembling. "I just want to be understood. I want you to remember that I have feelings too, that I gave things up, and sometimes it hurt." I held her hand tighter and whispered, "I understand, and I promise I'll never let you feel that way again." It hit me then. Marriage isn't just about honoring the vows you made years ago. It's about constantly renegotiating, constantly learning each other again as life changes. To stay in love, you have to face the hard truths, confront the messy memories, and above all choose your partner over your pride. After that tearful night, I thought maybe things would finally ease up between us. But marriage isn't something you can fix with just one conversation. It's more like an old wound. Takes time, patience, and a lot of care to heal. The tension in the house wasn't as sharp as before, but it was still there, hiding in the quiet moments. My wife wasn't snapping at me anymore, but sometimes I'd catch her with this faraway look, like she was still carrying a question she didn't know how to answer. One evening, while I was at my desk catching up on emails, she walked into the room with a cup of tea in her hand. She set it down gently, then stood there for a moment, not saying a word. I looked up, and there was something in her eyes, hesitation, maybe even fear, but also determination, do you think? She paused, her voice soft, that we've skipped too many important conversations over the years. That question hit me hard. She wasn't just talking about friends or boundaries anymore. She was talking about us. About all the times we let the busyness of life, work, kids, bills drown out the real talks we should have had. We hadn't been asking each other the simplest but most necessary questions. Are you okay? Am I okay? Are we okay? I set my laptop aside and nodded. Yeah, I admitted. I think we have. She sat down across from me, wrapping her hands around her cup like she needed the warmth to steady herself. You know, she said slowly, it's not that I suddenly want to go out and make a bunch of guy friends. It's more that, for so many years, I told myself I wasn't allowed. I put myself in this little box because I thought that's what you wanted. And while I stuck to that, I kept watching you stay connected with your female friends. Even if it was nothing romantic, it still felt unfair. It felt like you got to live with more freedom than I did. Her words were heavy, but not angry. For once, she wasn't lashing out. She was simply opening up, raw and vulnerable. I took a breath before answering. I get it now. And I'm sorry. Not sorry for having friends, but sorry for not seeing how that looked through your eyes. I should have been clearer years ago. I should have made sure you knew I wasn't trying to control you. She gave a sad little smile. Yeah, maybe. But we can't go back, can we? We can only figure out how to move forward. From that day on, I tried to make small changes. We started going for evening walks, just the two of us. No kids, no phones buzzing in our pockets. We talked about everything: work, neighbors, old memories, even the silly worries we normally would have kept to ourselves. One night, walking through the park, she brought up a college friend she used to be close with. a guy she hadn't spoken to in years. She said it so casually, but I could tell it mattered that she was even mentioning him. I didn't interrupt or roll my eyes. I just listened. For the first time, I realized letting her talk about those old connections wasn't a threat to me. It was a gift. It was her letting me into a part of her story she'd been holding back. So I smiled and said, "You can tell me more if you want. It doesn't bother me." She looked at me like she was trying to figure out if I really meant it. But then she kept talking, her shoulders relaxing as she did. That moment opened a door. I began to see that what my wife wanted wasn't permission to have male friends, it was recognition. She wanted to know she wasn't under some invisible rule book. She wanted to be treated like an equal, with her own choices and her own space. And I started being more open to. When an old female friend texted me, I told her about it. Not because I had to, but because I wanted her to feel like she was part of my world, not standing outside of it. A few weeks later, we were sitting on the couch watching TV when she turned to me if I wanted to reconnect with a couple of guys from work. Just as friends, she asked carefully, "Would that bother you?" I squeezed her hand and smiled. "No, not at all. As long as you feel good about it. As long as it's clear and healthy, I won't stand in your way." She let out a long breath, almost like she'd been holding it for years. For the first time in a long time, she looked lighter. I know this isn't the end of the journey. She still needs time to learn that feeling of being boxed in, and I still need to prove I can be a safe place for her. But we've started, and that's what matters. The walks, the late-night talks, the small confessions, they're like new bricks we're laying down together, rebuilding a foundation that had started to crack. Marriage isn't a straight road. It twists, it doubles back, it tests you. But the goal isn't perfection, it's finding your way back to each other, over and over again. And for the first time in months, I felt a real sense of hope. Not just patching up old wounds, but stitching something stronger, something that might just outlast the storms still to come. After that night when my wife admitted she wanted a little freedom back, to break out of the invisible box she'd put herself in, for years I felt something shift between us. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was more like hearing a faint crack in a block of ice subtle at first. But once you hear it, you can't ignore it. From then on, our home carried a different rhythm. We started talking more, and not just about the kids, bills, or work schedules. We started talking about feelings, about the silences we used to brush past. Sometimes it was just a short exchange in the kitchen while washing dishes. Other times it was hours on the couch with mugs of tea, or during quiet evening walks around the neighborhood as fall crept in. One Friday night, after cleaning up the kitchen, she sat across from me at the table. Her eyes softened, not sharp like before, but heavy with thought. "Do you ever feel like we've just been passing each other in life, instead of actually meeting each other?" That question hit me like a gut punch. Passing each other. God, it was true. For years we'd been so busy keeping the machine running, school drop-offs, work meetings, family gatherings, holiday obligations. We worked hard for this family, but somewhere along the way, we forgot where the family started, with the two of us sitting side by side. Once so in love, we couldn't stop smiling. I let out a slow breath, nodding. "Yeah, I think you're right. I feel like it's been a long time since I really stepped into your world." In that moment, we both seemed to silently agree. If we wanted this marriage to survive, not just as roommates under the same roof, but as partners, we needed change, So we started small. She told me about an old male friend from college, someone she used to study with, who later moved to another city, then disappeared from her life for years. She didn't say it with longing or guilt, just honesty, a piece of her past she'd never really shared. I listened. For once, I didn't feel the old defensiveness, that knee-jerk flash of jealousy. Instead, I felt grateful that she trusted me enough to open up. I said quietly, "You can tell me more if you want. I want to know if it matters to you." She blinked, like she wasn't sure she heard me right. For years, I'd been the type to shut conversations like that down. But this time, her shoulders relaxed. She smiled faintly, and then she did talk about that friend, about her college years, about how alive and free she used to feel back then. And it hit me, what she longed for wasn't other men. It was the freedom of being herself, the version of her that laughed loud, made spontaneous choices, and wasn't just the mum, the wife, or the reliable one. After that, I started sharing more too. I'd mention when a female friend from work texted, or when I bumped into someone from the past. Not like I was giving her a report, but like I was saying, this is part of my life, and I want you in on it. And surprisingly, instead of suspicion or cold silence, she laughed. Sometimes she'd even tease me. "So, you were kind of a ladies' man back in the day, huh?" Her tone wasn't bitter anymore. It was playful, almost like when we were dating. That spark of humor we'd lost for so long started peeking through again. One evening, as we walked through the park, leaves crunching underfoot, she suddenly asked, "What if I started having lunch or coffee with a couple of guy friends from work? Just, to catch up, nothing weird. Would that bother you?" I squeezed her hand, looked her in the eyes. "No, I wouldn't be upset. As long as you feel comfortable and everything's clear and healthy." "I trust you." Her eyes welled up instantly. She didn't say it, but I knew what she was thinking. For years, she hadn't been asking for permission. She'd just been waiting for those 3 words. I trust you. I'm not naive. I know a few late-night walks and heart-to-hearts can't erase years of built-up resentment and silence. But these talks, these small shifts, they were the beginning of something new. We made those evening walks a ritual. Even on rainy nights, we'd throw on jackets and stroll slowly under a drizzle, laughing about old memories. On nights we stayed in, we'd sit together on the couch, TV off, phones down, just talking. The silences weren't heavy anymore. They became pause of space for us to breathe and listen to each other's hearts again. I began to understand something clearly. Marriage isn't supposed to be a wall. It's a bridge. If you treat it like a wall, you lock yourselves in separate rooms, shouting through the cracks, waiting for the other person to break first. But if you treat it like a bridge, you walk across to each other, even if it's slow, even if it's scary, you meet in the middle. And she was changing too. Instead of bottling everything up, she started speaking up when something upset her. Sometimes she fumbled with the words, sometimes she cried halfway through. But I realized, her stumbling wasn't weakness, it was trust. She believed I would listen this time. I also changed. Before, whenever I heard male co-worker or old friend, my stomach twisted and I'd shut down. Now, I tried to lean in, ask gentle questions. Not interrogation, curiosity, care. It was an ordinary fall morning. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting our living room in soft gold. I sat on the old couch we'd shared for 20 years, sipping coffee. My wife walked in with a plate of toast, set it down, and smiled. "You know," she said, "we've come a long way." That simple line carried everything to decades of arguments, silences, tears, and forgiveness. I looked at her and asked, "Have you ever felt it was unfair? The rules we set, the limits we lived with?" She chuckled softly, a little sad. "Of course. There were times I felt trapped. But it wasn't just why I helped build that box too. I was afraid of hurting us, so I cut off things I didn't need to. And in the process, I cut off parts of myself." Her honesty hit me hard. Marriage isn't only shaped by your partner's rules, it's also shaped by your own fears. In the weeks that followed, we talked more about what's unfair and what's happy, sometimes on long walks, sometimes over late-night tea. She asked once, "What if I had a male friend I could share things with, things I don't tell anyone else? How would you feel?" I thought about it carefully, then said, "I'd probably feel jealous sometimes. But if it made you feel alive, I'd learn to accept it. As long as you always choose to come back to me." Her eyes filled with tears. That was what she needed, not permission, but trust. Slowly, our marriage began to feel new, not because of grand gestures, but in small ways: cooking dinner together, turning off our phones, talking honestly about regrets and dreams we'd hidden for years. I admitted moments of loneliness. She admitted feeling boxed in, and instead of blaming, we listened. One evening she whispered, "I used to think marriage was either happiness or unfairness. But now I see it's both. Some days feel unfair. But if love is still there, even unfairness becomes part of happiness." I held her hand. Yeah, maybe that's the truth. No marriage is perfect, but love and listening can carry us through. And that's how we've made it this far, not by avoiding storms, but by finding our way back to each other again and again. It's not a fairy tale ending. We still fight, still get tired. But now, instead of walking away, we walk back. And maybe that's the best kind of ending a real marriage can have.